Public housing, to some it's a blessing, to others a great source of concern. Galveston is currently trying to figure out what to do about rebuilding affordable housing for low-income families. But there are questions. Does the island need more? Who should pay for it? And what is the ultimate cost? Tonight, Galveston Public Housing, the government, and $100 million. I'm Ernie Manous, and this is Houston 8. Joining us tonight are Paula Neff, Vice Chairperson of the Galveston Housing Authority, David Stanowski, the Galveston Open Government Project, and Mayor Joe Jaworski, City of Galveston. First off, Paula, I think your title has changed.
It has.
You're now chair of the committee.
Yes.
Right? Okay. Mayor, I want to start with you with the first question. Explain what we are talking about. What is at issue here from your point of view?
Well, Galveston, Texas is a town that has people who are physicians at University of Texas Medical Branch all the way down to the people that are changing the bed sheets at the hospital, working in our tourism industry, working for the city of Galveston. Sometimes that involves people that are working for a very low wage. What we want to make sure in Galveston is that the people who are cornerstones of our economy have safe, clean, affordable housing. What we're talking about is nothing less than the guarantees put forth in the Civil Rights Act from 1968 that people have safe, clean, affordable housing. That's what the Galveston Housing Authority is charged to do.
Okay, and over to you, Paula. As I understand, when the storm came through, much of that was destroyed.
569 units that were inhabited on 4 different footprints of public housing were completely destroyed and therefore had to be demolished.
How much remained?
0 remained as far as...
So all of it was
correct,
wiped out?
Correct. The only thing that remained were the elderly units that we had.
And David, as I understand it, so the government wants to replace what they lost. Why is this an issue?
We feel that Galveston has far more than its fair share of public housing. Prior to the hurricane, our calculations show that we had about 4.5 times the national average per capita public housing units per resident of the city. Right now, with the 569 gone, we're still above the national average. If we go back with another 569, with our lower population, we'll have about 5 times the national average per capita. And nobody else in Galveston County, no other city, has any public housing at this point. So we really feel like the rest of the county ought to assume this responsibility rather than the city.
Okay, let me just clarify something, though. But, Paul, you said everything had been wiped out, but you're saying we still have more per capita. Explain how do both exist?
Let me take a shot at that. Actually, in addition to the 569 units that were all in 1- and 2-story Cold War-era style buildings, there are 2 high-rises that did not suffer substantial flood damage. The people that live in those are about 400 units of elderly public housing. Those still exist, and they existed the day after the storm. What we're talking about is family and disabled public housing that the federal government has given us, fortunately, $100 million to rebuild.
So if the money has been given, David, I'm going to go back to you on this. If the money has been given to the area for this particular reason, why don't we just use it for what it's been earmarked for? It's not like you're going to be taxed for it after the fact. The money already exists for this purpose. If you don't use it, I don't know where the money goes, but why is it an issue?
Well, because public housing puts a great burden on the city services, police, fire, EMS, and the school system. And we feel like that with 410 units in place now, plus another 40 under construction, which puts us at the national average per capita, if we go to add another 569, we're going to be at 5 times the national average, and that other cities in the county ought to be sharing that burden, as many court cases have found, like Thompson v. HUD in Baltimore.
Paula, I'll let you talk to that point.
Well, there's definitely a need for affordable housing, and I think there's a misconception of public housing and who lives in public housing. I know when I moved back to the island, the money I was making, I qualified for public housing. And so there is definitely a need to create affordable housing on the island that goes past our elderly and disabled people. I mean, we're talking about working families and some of them young families.
Affordable housing, public housing. Interchangeable terms? No.
I think public housing is specifically defined as the units that are owned by the federal government. And as I understand it, there is a spectrum of affordable housing in any healthy community. Right now, Galveston is suffering because of the people that are making less than 80% of the area median income. And that area median income is about $32,000 to $35,000 a year. If you're making 80% of that number annually, then you're eligible. Combine that with the fact that the private rent market, because if you're making that kind of money, you're not owning a house. So you're looking to the rental market. It just turns out that if the rental market does not provide affordable housing for you, then the only place for you to go to is a housing authority. It's the same choice people make that we hear about when they have to choose food over medicine. The idea is we want the people that are working within our community, who are part of the three legs of our economy, the hospital, the port, and tourism, to live in safe, clean, affordable homes so they can bathe, so they can cook their meals, so their children can sleep the day before they have to go to school.
What about then the issue of the crime and the EMS and all that Dave was just talking about?
Well, that is something that every city experiences. I don't know that anyone has shown me detailed statistics that say it's because of the public housing tenants. The fact is, there's people living in Galveston now that are committing crimes. Fortunately, our crime is being dealt with in a very professional way because we have community policing and a very professional police force. I don't buy the arguments that have been put forward by some who expect us simply to believe them, that public housing equals crime, that public housing equals drug addiction. The reality is poverty equals crime. Poverty equals drug addiction. It is our job, and the Housing Authority is suited to do it, to smother intergenerational poverty out of Galveston's existence once and for all.
David, is the assumption then if there isn't public housing rebuilt in those areas, that people who cannot afford housing will just leave the island? Is that what your group is supporting, hoping for?
Well, we would support the remedy that was put forth in Thompson v. HUD, which was brought by the NAACP, Legal Defense Fund, to offer low-income minorities better opportunities in more suburban areas where there are better schools, lower crime, and better economic opportunities. That's what the court, and there's a whole series of cases that have ruled in that way. And we feel that that's the best way to handle this, is to build some public housing in League City, Friendswood, Dickinson, and places like that, and offer these people the opportunity to move to those areas.
Mayor, I saw you shaking your head.
Well, first off, I think our public school system is going to set a national standard. I don't buy the argument that somehow Galveston is an unhealthy place for someone who qualifies for public housing to live. I think Galveston sells as one of its greatest attributes diversity. I think Galveston is different than suburban bedroom communities. That's why I moved there. That's why it has lasting power. So my view on this is that our school district, which has abandoned school zones, and now it's a magnet school system. You can choose the magnet school you want to go to. We have a new crop of charter schools growing in Galveston. Children are being educated in first-class facilities, and the teachers are first class. So right now, as we rebuild this finite number of 569 units, for people, maybe 70% are already on the island. This is just a way of taking a funded mandate from the United States government, building $100 million worth of quality public housing that will be not just the structures themselves, but methods and programs to lift people up out of intergenerational poverty. Ernie, I'm telling you, this is an opportunity for Galveston to get put on the map with the progressive policies that HUD offers now, and show people how public housing should be done going forward in the future.
So, Paul, then how do you move forward? What is the new plan? I've seen in some things folks are arguing that this plan is keeping us in the 1950s instead of moving ahead to the 2000s. What's your opinion on that?
I think you look at what's already worked in the nation, and what has worked is looking at what has poverty thrive, and then what has it, what suffocates the life out of poverty. And one model in particular that I've visited personally even before I was on the board is in Atlanta, Georgia, where the East Lake Meadows that formerly had a violent crime rate of 18 times the national average and all other horrible statistics to go with it, they were able in 10 years' time to completely transform not just the facilities, but the people that were living in the facilities, so that they were then way more self-sufficient. I mean, the numbers are just off the charts.
How did they do that?
How did they do that? They implemented programs. They implemented work requirements. They implemented job skills and trainings. Anything that people were lacking or standing still as a result of not having the education or the opportunities, they plugged in those opportunities, and they gave first priority to the public housing residents, as they did with a charter school.
So is that the plan for this redevelopment?
Absolutely. We will not just be building structures. We will be building the unit and the entity that has people step out of poverty.
There are people there are groups out there, of course, against the handouts from the government to people, but they also say that they're against doing this if there's not drug testing and strict enforcement within the areas. Where do we fall on that?
I think you have to be privy on the fair housing laws, and I would think that drug testing probably goes outside of that. But what you can do, and one thing that we will be doing, is having somebody outside of the housing authority. A lot of times housing authorities manage their own units, and then the policing is kind of the housing authority's responsibility. What is working all over the nation is creating mixed income units, which means that there's also market rate units mixed in with the public housing units. And there is a private management company that manages the property. That means maintenance management as well as policing management, 24-hour security, making sure that everything is going as it should be on the property.
David, some people say that this new plan violates the Civil Rights Act of 1964, Fair Housing Act of 1968, and HUD guidelines in the 2001 Comprehensive Plan. Can you address any of that?
You mean the Eastlake model?
I think the Eastlake Magnolia Homes also.
Oh, well, first of all, let me back up for a second as far as data about crime. We asked the Galveston Police Department to run a year's worth of data the year prior to the hurricane on the footprints of the prior housing projects in the city. And they came up with 20% of the crime was committed in those footprints, and it has about 3% of the population. Now, granted, we could say that's the old model and a new model could do a better job, and we would agree with that. One of our concerns is we believe that most of this housing should be moved to the mainland, to the county in higher opportunity areas so that it isn't all in Galveston. But if we're not able to achieve that, we've studied the Eastlake model, and we do think that's the best choice that we have. We're concerned that the numbers that GHA has put out so far don't really reflect a total commitment to building those 569 in mixed income. There's a lot of talk about 200 to 300 in scatter sites, which is not the same model whatsoever as what Eastlake did. So if we have to do it, we agree Eastlake's the best way to do it.
Let the mayor jump in right here.
And what we have to remember is that Eastlake within Atlanta is a little different than Galveston Housing Authority within the city of Galveston, and even less, let me say, within the low to moderate income neighborhoods in Galveston. We're talking about maybe an 8-mile long, mile and a half wide piece of land. Imagine I-10 to Westheimer between downtown and the Loop. So the ability to provide a cohesive sort of network, even among scattered site housing, is certainly doable in Galveston. Think also, Ernie, about the opportunity that Galveston has to remove some of the decades-old blighted structures that dot our neighborhoods, that bring down property values. We can remove those rotted homes, clean the land, and build 200 to 300 scattered site, as David correctly points out, that will lift the property values, that will put a beautiful $150,000 home that could be a great blessing to the neighborhood. Secondly, even though the federal government will own that land, it's going to generate a payment in lieu of taxes on the $150,000 improvement that will probably double what the city of Galveston gets right now from the rotted structure that really provides no tax benefit at all.
And I have no horse in this race. And I come to this and I wonder, from what I'm hearing you say and from what I'm hearing them say, is basically these people in low-income housing are a problem. And best for our city is to not have them in our city. But it kind of feels a little uncomfortable for people to actually say, ship them off, let them be someone else's problem. And I'm sure critics see it that way. So,
sure. And I would invite you to have another program where you ask all the mayors of Galveston County to come down and discuss public housing and why they don't want to have public housing in their cities. I think that would be very interesting.
But I'm assuming when you moved to Galveston, when the people that live in Galveston now came there for the most part, it was already there.
Right.
So you came into a situation knowing what was there.
Yeah.
It has been removed by an act of nature, and now they're just trying to, and in some ways, improve what they had, but reestablish what they had. Why is that wrong?
Well, that's before anybody did the research and found out that we're currently the only city in the county with any public housing, number one, and that we will have 5 times the national average per capita if we go back to that. I don't think anybody was happy with the way it was in Galveston, but it was a situation before it was destroyed by the hurricane that you really didn't have any choice. There wasn't an opportunity to redo it, because if you had just stood up one day and said, we want to knock all these things down and run people off, you would have had the world's worst court battle in front of you. It would have gone on for 20 years, and we certainly were not interested in doing that. But now that we have this opportunity, we have a clean slate, we're saying, well, why are you putting everybody back right where they were in the most low opportunity zones in the county?
I'm just curious, is it a fact, do we know that if you don't rebuild the housing and some other community does build it, that the low-income folks that we're talking about, would leave the island and go to these new housing? Or would they just try and live on the island in a different way?
Well, the answer to your question, it's a good question, and the answer is they necessarily wouldn't leave the island. In fact, they didn't leave the island. Most of the people that will be occupying the new 569 units, both scattered site and duplex model like the East Lake model, I'd say about 75 to 80% of them are living right now on disaster housing assistance program vouchers, being paid to private landlords, because that's the only game in town right now. Currently, their children are in school. I would say maybe a quarter of the 569 families would return from somewhere else. Another thing about it is, Ernie, you're right. There's no example of political will or trust that you could point to in America these days that would have allowed us, absent a storm, to say to the public housing residents, look, we need to knock this Cold War era barracks-style public housing down. Let us do that for you. Live here temporarily. We promise we'll build it back. It just wouldn't happen. So it took Hurricane Ike to do something that we should have done 10 to 20 years ago anyway. The reality is Galveston is different from League City, from Dickinson, from Friendswood, from Texas City. We're an island. They're not. We have a seawall. They don't need one. And we had a public housing authority erected in 1940. So we have had that online for 70 years. The fact that the storm wiped out the units does not somehow defeat our obligation to forward ourselves in public housing. Now we have $100 million to set a national example. I'm not a statistician, okay? I'm not a social demographer. I'm the mayor. And so this is what leadership looks like. This is what we're doing.
Okay, what about the question that I asked earlier about the Civil Rights Act and the Fair Housing Act, that critics say that the plan goes against those?
Well, it doesn't.
There it is.
Yeah, I actually have a legal degree, and I've practiced civil rights law among the other federal practice that I have done. All you can do when you're a mayor is to get the best legal advice you can. My legal advice goes against what Mr. Stanowski understands. As it turns out, we have an obligation to provide fair housing. We have an obligation to affirmatively further fair housing. The reality is we're probably going to do pretty much what we agree on anyway, which is to scatter site. Do not allow the old Cold War era grouping of poverty to exist all in one clump. It's got to be set out in certain census tracts that create essentially a middle income, a mixed income reality. The idea being positive peer pressure is something that we can afford to do as people who perhaps aren't earning as much see among themselves that they're not all clumped together in a group of desperation.
David, my question then would be, we also say spreading the wealth, but would this also be spreading the problem if you do the scattered?
Well, we're not agreeing with the mayor on the scatter site. We don't think that's a solution at all. If we are not able to move this into the county, we would like to do all 569 with an East Lake model, with all of the amenities and facilities that they had: charter school, YMCA, community center, daycare center, after-school programs that made that model work better. You can't do that with scatter sites if you've got them all over the city. And we are in agreement that you have to put these in certain census tracts, which is what we've been saying all along, that meet the proper demographics. And we believe that the demographics that meet the criteria set forth by Thompson, by Westchester, and by what the work that the Kirwan Institute is doing with a 14-point index is going to limit our census tracts to maybe 2 or 3 out of 22 in the city.
So let me just get this right. If you're not moving it off the island, you folks propose it all being in one location.
It doesn't have to be in one location, but it has to be in big developments that allow it to put in all of the facilities, like a charter school, a YMCA community center, all the things that Eastlake did that help make Eastlake a better model. If you scatter site, you can't put a charter school with a fourplex as you scatter around the city.
I'll get to you, Mayor, in 1 second. I want to jump to Paula and say, though, what do the statistics show? That we are more successful when we scatter it out or more successful with Eastlake?
There's statistics that actually support both. And where we came up to that, the new board, is basically listening to the community. And the community very loudly said, we want scattered sites. For a number of different reasons. You're putting people into a different environment. You are kind of creating mixed income by doing that. But you're also giving people a feeling of having a home that's their own, and even the potential of possibly even setting some of those up as, being under the housing authority for the first 5 or 10 years, and then having that family, if they so choose, roll over into home ownership at some point.
Over to the Mayor, I promise you we come back.
Right. Just wanted to clarify and reassert the comment that Galveston is not the same size as Atlanta. I mean, we've got right now a 45,000 person population. Hopefully it will continue growing. But what we can do is look at the 5 charter schools that are dotted throughout the island, from 61st Street down to 11th Street, and we can achieve the same balance and the same access to these programs that Eastlake, in a 1.5 million plus population, needed to put in one area. The fact is, Galveston can do it both ways. We can have scattered site that benefits from the complement of programs and have some plexes, if you want to call it that.
Okay, one thing that I keep reading, and I'm not sure where we are in all of this, so help educate me on this, loss of federal funding, that if the money isn't used for that, eventually you folks will be penalized down the road. Right.
This is something that is abundantly clear now. After Hurricane Ike and Gustav, the United States Congress appropriated $3.1 billion in disaster aid. The Houston-Galveston region got about $1.9 billion of that $3.1. Galveston's take on that is somewhere between currently $600 and $700 million. Of that $600 to $700 million, $100 million is for public housing. If we do not build the 569 units on Galveston Island, not only do we lose the $100 million, we lose the whole $600 to $700 million. This money would be used for private homes. This money would be used for the wastewater treatment plant, $70 million job, the thing that fell apart right after Ike that prevented my predecessor, Lyda Ann Thomas, from letting people back on the island. You talk about a blend of misery. If we don't get the wastewater treatment plant, the streets, the water pump stations, and UTMB rebuilt with this money, then Galveston is going to be in a great deal of difficulty. So it seems to me we can accomplish the moral objective of providing clean, safe, fair housing with a funded mandate and get the benefit of the rest of the money as well. To me, it's very clear the state has told us this is what we must do, and this is what Galveston is doing.
David, I'll go to you with this one.
The conciliation agreement basically says what the mayor is correct in what he said, but it does say that the entire HGAC region will lose the money if Galveston doesn't build the 569 units. We say, fine, let the entire HGAC region go back and renegotiate this agreement. This is part of the whole unfairness that existed before the storm, where we're the only city in Galveston County that is forced to do public housing. They're not forcing any other city in the county or the HGAC region. There's nothing in there about you must build so many units of public housing or you don't get any money. It just says the city of Galveston must build 569 or the whole region doesn't get any money. That, to us, that's an invalid, illegal contract. We were not part of the negotiations, and it's requiring something that we didn't agree to do.
Mayor?
Ernie, it's important to remember the actual verb. It's not rebuild. The verb is restore. The fact is we had 569 units the day before the storm. All we're being asked to do is restore the units that were there.
Who put the criteria in place?
The Galveston Housing Authority moved to raise the Cold War era structures. Anytime a housing authority has an opportunity to do that, it should these days. 1950s and 60s style barracks don't work anymore. When they moved to do that, fair housing advocates that were representing some of the tenants came before them and said, look, we don't want to have to take you to court to get, an injunction. You need to agree to restore these. I think it was a reasonable thing for the Housing Authority to agree to. Thank heaven, it's a funded mandate. So that original agreement was simply incorporated into an agreement that the state of Texas made with Washington. So this is Rick Perry and his Texas Department of Housing and Community Affairs put that in. Why? Because we're the only town that had all our public housing destroyed by a storm.
Okay, David, I'll let you have the last word.
Well, as an example, Texas City had 110 public housing units prior to the storm. They tore them down. There's no mandate for them to rebuild. It's slightly different circumstances. But once again, when that conciliation agreement was negotiated, somebody could have said that the region needs to do public housing rather than just the city of Galveston. Basically, the governor threw us under the bus.
There is.
I said I'd give David the last word. We have 10 seconds left. I'll let you go.
There's a great deal of affordable housing all throughout Galveston County. They just don't call it public housing, but it serves the same income stream.
And we wrap at that point. Paul, I'm sorry I didn't get back to you, but thank you all for coming in. Now, each week we invite you to visit our home online at HoustonPBS.org. Simply click on the local programs bar, pick Houston 8, and you can join our online community. Read about the guests, learn more about the topic, and even watch past episodes. That does it for us tonight. Until next time, I'm Ernie Manous. Thank you for joining us, and have a great week.